Welcome, everyone. We're back with the latest episode of the Coerver Coaching Podcast. It's great to be here with a very special guest. It's Dan Donachie. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
For all the audience, Dan and I are family friends. Our dads being really good friends. And actually, Danny, you were telling me a story about your dad going through the Coerver method with you as a young player when you were at Oldham.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how you got introduced to Coerver and how it all started?
Yeah, so I'm not sure how old I was exactly, but he got totally enthused by it. I was probably about 8 to 10, something like that. Right. So he'd come home, and at the time, all I wanted to do was be a footballer. So as you can imagine, I would just practice time and time again. And so my dad introduced it to that year group at Oldham. And out of that year group, 4 became international footballers. And if you include me, 5 became professional footballers. Wow. And my dad used to take me around to award ceremonies, and he'd put me on stage and say, right, this is what all your kids need to practice. And I'd be there totally embarrassed.
So for you guys, Danny's referring to his dad, Willie Donachie, who was a great player for City and for Scotland. And I guess we were kind of uniquely lucky, Dan, to grow up in football households. Like, if you think back to then, what were the main differences and what sort of unique experiences did that give you? Because I can think back to the people I met primarily and the access to people. Is that what you found as well?
Yeah, totally. Now I work with a lot of top footballers.
Yeah.
And to me, because I grew up around top footballers, it's completely normal, completely natural.
Yeah.
So I've spent most of my life in football clubs. And it's just normal, isn't it? It's where you grow up, it's normal. Whereas if you come from the outside, it feels different. So the top footballers I work with, I treat them as absolutely normal people, which they are, by the way.
Yeah.
And growing up, my dad, as you know, is a little bit mad. And so he, as a player and as a coach, his big thing was he wanted to improve all the time.
Yeah.
So we'd have people staying at the house, like movement experts, meditation experts, vision experts, physios. We had blind physios staying who were amazing with their touch. Everything you can imagine he'd do to get better. And then he became a coach, and everything that he wanted to learn to be a better coach, but also to help the players he worked with.
Right.
And I used to have bunk beds, and many a time I'd have overweight players staying on the bed above me, and I'd just be, can I swear?
Yeah.
Shitting myself that they were going to fall through and in the middle of the night. And they'd stay for 2 weeks, and he'd be out doing extra training with them. He'd be doing meditation, visualization with them.
Yeah.
And he'd be getting them to, when they eat, pay real attention, and you have to chew your food 28 times every mouthful, all stuff like this.
Yeah.
So pretty full on. But now what do I find myself doing? I'm not quite at the stage where they're living with me, but I'm doing the same thing with players now.
Was that always, I know obviously you had a professional career too, Danny, which was interrupted by injury, but what an example to have at home. I mean, I think about, that for me, and now, I find myself in the grassroots game and loving coaching again, and having such a great example at home. Was that your destiny?
Yeah, I think, I work with a lot of people in all different fields, and obviously what you're born into has a big impact on what you become.
Yeah.
And like a lot of people, my dad was my idol, and it just so happened that he was a lot of other people's idol as well. So that makes him an even bigger idol. But I've got early memories. I've got one very early memory. I must have been about 2, and it was at Main Road where Man City used to play. And I can remember it was after the game, and I went out onto the pitch, and there was just this atmosphere, this energy on the pitch. And I was just like, oh, this is heaven. And I used to go there. They had a big bath. It was like a swimming pool with me. I'd be swimming in it, and there was grass and mud and everything. But it was just heaven for me.
Yeah.
And when I was 5, I got knocked out because I was behind the goal, and Brian Kidd's shot missed, hit me in the face, knocked me out. So
wow.
It becomes part of who you are, doesn't it?
Wow, that's incredible. Dan, I mean, when I think about when we sort of knew each other, when you were probably in your late teens, and I remember you also going to university games and then going for your sort of early professional career, etc. Were you obsessed by that by the sport and by your sort of journey in becoming a professional? Was that all you thought about? Was it that your only track?
Yeah, totally. And my kids now, we say to them, or I say to them, because my wife don't believe me, but I say all I ever did was kick the ball against the wall. Yeah. And it's literally true. And I can remember it like it was yesterday. We had this garage, and then it was the kitchen, it was windows, and we had like panelled windows. And it cost me £8 for every little one that I smashed. And it cost me a lot of money, believe me. But I'd just be there hour after hour after hour, and there was nothing more that I loved doing.
Were you trying to, was it a game to knock
No, I was not trying to hit the window, I was trying to hit the garage. And that was why I was practicing, because I was rubbish.
So what's interesting about this, Dan, is knowing your story, right? Where you've got to in your career and your experience, all these brilliant professional clubs, but also your interests outside of football and how you're inspired by stuff outside of football.
Yeah.
How you can be on such a singular track and dedicate your life to becoming a professional player.
Yeah.
And then obviously the injury prevents that ultimately.
Yeah.
And then pivoting and being open and thoughtful enough and smart enough, I guess, and resourceful enough to then have such a great career, obviously linked to the game, but in a different field. Like, how did you go about that realization initially? Like, that playing thing's not going to work out, and this is what I want to do now.
Yeah, I don't see it like you're saying. I don't think it was smart at all, because I was so single-minded, and I can remember. So I dislocated my ankle. I signed for Carlisle as a pro. Dislocated my ankle in Japan with the World Student Games before I was supposed to start. So I was out for most of that season. Right. And then the start of the next season, I go on trial to Hibs, and did quite well, and think they were going to sign me. And then I dislocated my other ankle in a friendly game. So I can remember after that, I knew that it was over. Right. And I can picture it now. I was sat in a bath with my leg in a cast out of the bath, and I just cried and cried, because I knew that what I really wanted and that part of my identity had been finished. And it took me a long time to kind of recover from that and then find a different direction.
How long?
A long time. So I'd gone to physio, I'd done physio at university before this happened, because I signed for Carlisle after uni. And so I then became a physio and worked in physio, a lot of football clubs, as you know. But the seeds of what I was really interested in were always there, and it wasn't physio. I never really wanted to be a physio. And so now, only in the last 5 years maybe, has it kind of become clear what I really want to do.
Right.
But the seeds were always there. So when I signed for Carlisle, I was single-minded. However, there's another bit that I've not really mentioned, and that is that I did write to the abbot at the local monastery and say that I'm thinking about being a monk. I can't decide if I should be a footballer or a monk. What do you think? And he said, be a footballer. So there was always like that little kind of disconnect there. And obviously, for anyone that knows my dad or doesn't know my dad, like, he was a player, and he meditated every day, twice a day when I was a kid in the 70s, which is unusual. So that had a big impact on me as well.
There's a lot to unpack there, Dan. So basically, so in my head, I just thought, right, the playing thing didn't work out. Okay, let's quickly get into the physio side. Obviously, be part of some great professional clubs and all that tremendous experience. And now that evolved to where you are now. But really, that sounds then like more like a 20-year journey to get to where you are now, which is kind of content and happy with your specific role at the moment, which is a performance coach, working with individual players, not only footballers, but other athletes as well. Business people too, I think.
And teams and groups. And don't get me wrong, it's not that I didn't love being in football, but the role never quite felt like me. And I never really quite identified as a physio. Never, ever, which was unusual. And at the time, you've got to think, well, how stupid were you to kind of carry on? But I did love being in football. And the part of me that I do now kind of evolved over those years, and I learned different things, and it grew. So originally I studied physio, then I started to study mind-body techniques, and that just blew my mind, opened my mind completely to how powerful the subconscious is. So that opened me and started that journey more.
And mind-body techniques, and is that informed by sort of Indian practices?
No,
or stuff?
that
What's
isn't.
that?
That
What is
isn't.
that?
So that was, I started with cranial osteopathy, which is a very light touch, working on the bones of the cranium. And at the time, it was difficult for me because I'd come from like a scientific background, so-called, and then this thing was totally unscientific. But these remarkable things were happening when I started doing it. So I'd learn it on the course, and I'd just think these people are mad. I'm just in like this cult, and these people are mad. And then I'd go back to Everton, which was a Premier League club, and I'd experiment on Premier League players. And if you think about some of the players, there was one particular young player at that time who became a very famous player. And what was happening on these courses was happening with these young players. And it just blew my mind. I was like, what the hell? Because the body stores trauma from young age. It can be years and years and years, and you repress it and it stores it. And you're not aware of it at all. So through these techniques and others, these things come up, and it makes you more aware of the subconscious and the power it has.
And going back to the football side, so when you were at Everton, that sort of knowledge and training gave you, I guess, a unique value to those players you were working with, other physios perhaps not having that approach, etc.
Yeah,
is that kind of
I
what
guess
you
so.
experienced?
And like I say, it was a two-way thing. Like it was great for me because I was growing and learning and kind of developing into who I am now.
Yeah,
and it was helping them in a number of ways that wouldn't have happened if the madman wasn't there.
Okay, so you take that new training and your openness to that.
Let me tell you one story.
Okay.
So I've got another. I was thinking about Wayne Rooney in that one.
Is that who you were talking about?
Yeah, the young player.
Right.
He was 16 at the time. So there's another player, David Unsworth, who won't mind me saying this. So at the time, I was very skeptical and cynical. And so I just say to the players, right, come in and I'll do this thing and let's see what happens. So I do this thing with Unzi, and he gets this vision, and he has like an emotional release, but he sees this vision. And it's like, I vaguely remember it was a picture like of a boat and something else. And he was like, I've got no idea what that is. And that was it. So I was like, sorry, I can't help you. I don't know either. And then he comes in the next morning and he was like, you're not going to believe this. I went out for dinner last night. I'm sat on the table. I look up and I see the thing that I saw before we'd gone for dinner. I've never been there before. And loads of things like that started happening.
Okay, so I don't know enough about this process, Dan. So what are you doing in the process of working with the player? Are you somehow...
So at that time, it was like a very gentle touch that I was doing, and it gets you into like a trance state, if you call it that.
Trance state.
But I didn't really know anything about trance or anything. It just was kind of happening. They were showing me what to do with my hands, and this would happen, but then all of these experiences would happen. There's so many more. That's just one small example, but there's so many more of like emotional release and people who were in severe pain having an emotional release and then the pain going and not coming back. So it made me question everything that I'd been taught at uni and everything that what we're taught about the physical body. It's not true.
But in his example, he's had a foresight, or I don't know what you call that, a vision of something that hadn't happened to him yet?
Yes. He wasn't the only one. I'll tell you one more short story, and it was the masseur. He's still the masseur. So he had this vision, and it was these curtains. I think they were striped curtains, and he said it's like a heart drawn on it, and he didn't know what these curtains were. And I was like, yeah, I can't help you. I don't know. He came in the next morning and he said to me, got home from work that night, 6:00, phone goes, hospital. Your dad's had a heart attack. He's in hospital. Gets to the hospital. The curtains are the same curtains he saw. His dad was fine. But yeah, there's something.
So what's the explanation for this, Dan?
Well, the explanation is that not only is stuff stored in us from the past, the idea of time, like past, present, and future, isn't exactly what we think, because we do have access to the future somehow. And there's no logical explanation. It's beyond logic. And that's the battle I had, you know, my logical mind saying this is silly and ridiculous.
Sure.
And then you have experiences that you can't argue with.
Wow.
And as a player, when you see that, you realize that you're connected to something bigger than yourself.
Right.
And also your subconscious mind impacts everything that you do. So if there's patterns from childhood, they're going to impact how you play, how you feel, your relationships, your family, all of that.
So picking up on that, Dan, because you know, the idea of this pod is to link expertise and advice and experience from the pro game to grassroots coaches, players, and parents. So thinking about some of the stuff that happens on the weekend or at training, and some of the negative stuff that happens in grassroots football, unfortunately. Can you talk a little bit about the lasting impact that would have then on the children that then grow up to be adults, etc.? I mean, you mentioned obviously that trauma stays with them and will be with them forever, I assume. And then what the negative impact obviously could be.
So obviously, like all top players at some point were in grassroots. And with male players, there's a lot of difficult relationships with fathers. And, you know, when you ask me that question, I think immediately of a player that I'm working with now. He was at a top Premier League team. He's now at a different team. And he's like in his early 20s. And I'd say like his dad's probably not one of the worst that I've seen. But he pushed him a lot and probably even unconsciously. He wasn't like one of those that's shouting on the sidelines and really bad. But this player now is still working through the trauma of that as a young child with me. And I'm sure that that's impacting his career, 100%. We spoke earlier, you know, my own dad said that he wished he'd pushed me harder because he didn't push me at all. And I don't agree with it one bit. So this player isn't the only player that I work with that has to deal with and live with and work through the trauma of having a father that pushes them and isn't a father. So if anyone is listening that is a father, work through your own shit and don't pass it on to your kids, because it's just generational trauma repeating itself again and again. Wow. And we now know that they've done research on mice that generational trauma lasts up to 7 lifetimes. And if you're not breaking the bonds of that generational trauma, then it's a gift that you're giving to your children that could last at least 7 lifetimes. And with my own dad, the biggest gift he gave to me was breaking that bond, because his dad was really tough.
Abusive, almost.
Yeah. Not almost. So his dad said to him when he got picked for Scotland, and his dad was a big football fan, loved Scotland, said, "I'll never watch Scotland when you play for them because you're shit."
Oh, that's awful. Going back to sort of what you said about, you know, what you just said is also relevant, I guess, for elite players, elite youth players, and also grassroots players. I mean, I coach grassroots on the weekends, and there's millions of examples of positive stuff that I see every week. Yeah. But there's also some crap where you're like, that is just awful, and it's not helping the kid, and is completely disconnected from what your role should be in this situation. Yeah. Could you give some more advice, Dan, on maybe parents of, well, 2 things. One of elite kids that have a chance to make a career in the game. Yeah. But also, and it might be the same advice for kids, for parents. You think it is the same for parents that have just normal amateur players? Yeah.
So basically, the parents are projecting their own emotion onto their child, and also probably their unresolved desires. Right. So a lot of them wanted to be footballers when they were kids. And also now with the money, like you think, like I want my kid to be rich. Obviously you want your kid to be happy, but I want my kid to be rich, and then I want to be rich as well through my kid. It's very common. So the thing that all parents need to do is to work on the unresolved emotional stuff that is in them. And if they don't do that, then the minimum that they should do is not say a word when their kid's playing. Right. But even not saying a word is dangerous, because I remember Thierry Henry. He said that his dad was pretty a bad one, and he said I think he'd scored 3 goals in a game, and he got into the car and he was thinking, I wonder if he's happy with my performance. He scored 3 goals, and he said he knew, he could feel his dad's energy, and he knew he wasn't happy, and he knew that his dad was going to kick off with him. And there's another top player that I think of now. He played for Barcelona, and his dad, when he was a kid, he was 9. He lost the game, but he was the best player by far, played well, lost the game. His dad would take him home and then take him back to the pitch and make him run up and down the pitch non-stop until he was exhausted when he was 9 years old. So there's different levels. There's the unconscious stuff that you're giving off energetically to your kid. Then there's the verbal stuff, and then there's the physical stuff. Yeah. And one of the best books is Andre Agassi, Open, because he speaks about that so much. And obviously, like, people might think, oh, but he became world number 1. He became world number 1, but he was a drug addict and he was extremely unhappy. So my dad might think that by pushing me, I would have got higher as a player. But I'm happy that I'm a happy, well-balanced person that's not got all that trauma. And ultimately, to be a top player and to be able to withstand the huge pressure that it is, it has to come from inside. Because if it doesn't, and it's manufactured through trauma and parental pressure, it's very fragile. And I see a lot of players now where it unravels because of that. And, you know, addiction in football is very high, and that's another symptom.
Okay, Dan, so you talked about advice for the parent, and the first bit of advice was, you know, try and resolve that stuff. But if it's difficult for them to find care or therapy, etc. Yeah. Your second one was zip it. Yeah. Don't say anything. Don't say a word. Particularly, you know, you got pre, during, after.
Yes.
And we can see the stuff that goes on during the game and maybe before it, but it's after in the car that sometimes you think, oh.
Yes.
And I think that's from what I've seen, that would be my advice is make sure if you do have, you got to work your own shit out.
Yeah.
Think about that in that context. Don't say anything at any point.
Yeah.
Because it's going to ultimately.
Yeah. And another thing, like some of these males are very sort of alpha, aren't they? And so if they might not ever think about going to therapy or speaking to someone or anything like that, but work out ways where you can express that unresolved rage that isn't involved in putting it onto your kid.
Right.
And it's the same in football clubs. If you go into a Premier League stadium, there's people shouting things about players that it's got nothing to do with players. It's about all of their unresolved trauma and emotion. And the football is a vehicle for projection, isn't it? Just like Twitter.
So you talked about the parent, Dan. I think then talk about the player. So the young player, whether they're at an academy, playing international youth level or at the grassroots level, I assume, and I've seen it from my own anecdotal experience, you see the players' behaviour start to mirror that of their parents.
Yeah.
So do they lash out? Are they abusive to the referee or their own teammates? Are they starting to fight? Whatever's happening, there seems to be a link always.
Yeah.
Would that be your experience too? And
yeah, definitely. And like the way the emotional patterns that run in the family are going to have a huge impact on the child for sure. And it will play out in different ways. But yeah, it's the one interesting thing though is that I feel like younger people and younger players now are way more emotionally intelligent than my generation and generations since then. And there's some evidence to suggest that there's a collective unconscious in human beings, and when humans learn something, then it's kind of passed on like unconsciously to the whole generation. And one example is they did research about the New York Times crossword, and it's much easier to fill in the New York Times crossword the day after it was published because of the collective unconscious. So many people have done it, then unconsciously it's easier to do. And it's the same thing with, I don't do these, but like Wordle and stuff like that. At the end of the day, it's easier than the start of the day.
Because you've somehow acquired some knowledge, whether you heard it on the radio or a friend talking about it or something like that?
No, You don't hear it. It's unconscious. It's unconscious. And I'm sure this is why the younger generation are much more emotionally intelligent than our generation, because our generation has done a lot of work and that has passed on. Because if you think about it, the younger generation spend most of their time on a phone. So logically, it doesn't make any sense that they'd be more emotionally intelligent. Logically, they should be absolutely brain dead. But they're not, because I work with a lot of young players and they astound me with their emotional intelligence. Honestly, if I think about what I was like at that age, they are amazing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Maturity and
Yes. Yes.
Okay, we got a lot to talk about here, Dan. Two players that I think about immediately in the highest profile football at the moment, Cole Palmer and Yamal at Barca. I was lucky enough to watch Barcelona last week against Getafe.
Yeah.
First time I've seen Yamal play, 17 years old. I could not believe how smart he was.
Really?
Oh, what a player. Best player I've seen in a long, long time. And he's got this relationship now, or partnership with Koundé behind him, Jules Koundé, the French guy.
Yeah.
Oh my God, they were fantastic. Like, just incredible. The variety in his game, unbelievable. And I think he's only 17 and obviously lit up the Euros.
Yeah.
And Cole Palmer on fire at the moment.
Yeah. So I know Cole. I know Cole.
Okay.
So I can speak from experience.
Okay.
And I don't know if you saw the interview that he did, but basically he did an interview and he was sat like this in the interview and the interviewer said, "Oh, you're relaxed." That sums him up. He's totally like that. So I met him at the under-21s Euros last summer, and part of my work was medical and part of it I was doing breath work and meditation and visualization. So normally when I work individually with players, they come to me, so they've got a desire to do it. But in a team setting like that, they're not all up for it. So I got them in groups of 8 and we were in circles, which is quite, you have to be quite vulnerable to do that. And players don't normally do that. So they're there and they found it really difficult. Like, they're like school kids. They're laughing. They're not able to express their feelings, all of this. And Cole,
What are you trying to get them to do, Dan? You're trying to...
I was doing breath work with them,
Okay.
And visualization, but I was trying to get them just to be more open and just to try and communicate about what they were feeling and connecting with their bodies more, stuff like that. And yeah, they found it difficult. But Cole, like, I had a real strong bond with Cole, partly because he's from Manchester, but he's a great kid and he's got a good sense of humor. But Cole struggled with it anyway. He was like, "Whoa, what am I doing this for? Like, breath work, I don't need this," all that. So I had a few sessions with him throughout the tournament. We did really well in the tournament. And then the morning of the final, I'm sat with Carsley and the coaches, and Cole walks in and he goes, "Oh, you'll be pleased. I was doing that breath work in my bed last night." And the coach was just all like, "Oh my God, how did you get through to him?" So yeah, that's the other thing about coaches and parents. You never know what impact the things that you say, but more importantly, who you are and what you do has on young people.
Yeah, and the timing of it, right? Like you said, it took a while and then the penny dropped.
Yeah.
Why is it, Dan, that him at 21, is he 20? Early 20s,
maybe 22, yeah.
Yamal at 17, why are these, they seem like outliers. And the first thing you think about them is that fortitude and giving the ball when it matters most. And you like, I love NBA basketball, and the whole game set up to give the best player the ball at the critical time, basically at the end.
Yeah.
So how are those players developing that kind of mindset?
I think they're wired differently. So if you think about Wayne Rooney, he reminds me a lot of Cole. And when Wayne came to Everton when he was 16, well, he was there before. When he came into the first team at 16, he would just go out and train as if he was in his garden with his mates. And the players who are the best players are able to keep that capacity for enjoying playing and keep that joy. When you see Cole, he's not like anxious, he's not fearful. And for most players at some point in their careers, the pressure and the anxiety gets higher than the desire to play. So the pain of the mistakes, the trauma of the mistakes gets bigger in their mind than the possibility of creating something great. And for me, like Cole and Yamal and Rooney and those type of players, they've just got a high capacity. But I don't know about Yamal, but Rooney and Cole come from really disadvantaged neighborhoods. And the other thing to say is I've worked with a lot of players from South America, and, you know, Richarlison had a gun to his head when he was 10. Yerry Mina had a gun to his head when he was 12. So when you come from that kind of pressure, the pressure of being in a Premier League game is not that much, is it? Whereas kids from here, like, life's so comfortable, when they get into that pressure, it's a lot of pressure. So you create environments that are comfortable, too comfortable.
It's an interesting balance, isn't it, Dan? Because you talked about initially about the trauma part of it and it being better for the person to remove that trauma. But then you've mentioned examples there of, you know, terrible trauma and difficult circumstances, etc., that were probably part of the formula or part of the development of that player and the sort of heights that they've reached.
Yeah.
What do you think is the ideal environment for a player to thrive or to develop?
Yeah, I think it's difficult. But obviously those players that we're talking about, they were in traumatic environments, not that their parents were inflicting their own trauma onto them.
Right.
There's a difference. But the reality is a lot of players like Thierry Henry become top players, maybe because their fathers drove them so hard. But I don't feel like that is the best way, because, like I say, intrinsic motivation is much more formidable than extrinsic motivation. And for me, as I said, I didn't have nothing like that from my dad, but I just wanted it so badly that I'd do whatever it took to get there. So I would put myself in, I'd do anything to get there, put myself in any situation to get there. So I'd seek discomfort unconsciously to get there.
Wow. You like the discomfort?
No, I didn't like it. But if you said to me, you need to run over hot bricks to become a Premier League footballer, I'd do it, because the desire was so strong. So it's that relation between pain of something that you're avoiding and desire of something that you really want.
Yeah.
And for me, obviously, it was a bit complicated because I wanted to be like my dad. So that desire to be like my dad, who was a footballer, like, they're mixed up.
Right.
But yeah, it's very strong. Even now, like, I don't think it'll happen. I'll be a Premier League player. But like, when I go to a Premier League stadium, which I do a lot, I get an excitement. I feel it. And you listen to all my podcasts, David Moyes said when he walks into a stadium, he gets that feeling, the same feeling that he got when he walked there with his dad. It's an excitement.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that one of the wonderful things about football, how it makes you think about your own journey and your own family, the elder part of your family, and then if you're lucky enough to have kids, then there's that connection there, and it's the best.
Yeah,
it is the best. You talked about joy, Dan. So I want to talk about joy, and particularly joy in football, because I think about it from a grassroots perspective, and I've been caught in that trap a bit as well. Like, we're 1-0 down, and I'm thinking about how, you know. Seriously, how are we going to tactically adjust? And I'm saying to my friend who I run the team with, you know, we've got to do X, Y, and Z. And then I forget that these are 11 or 12-year-old boys and girls. Like, what plan am I on? But I know all this stuff, but the emotion of it derails me a little bit.
Yeah.
How do we, as grassroots coaches, ensure that joy and the joy of football and all the great things about it remain sort of central?
It has to be your intention. It has to be top of your priorities, because we get bombarded with things that we need to do these days. So if you really want to make football joyful for kids, then that needs to be your priority. And you need to think about it, speak it into the world, and also connect with your own joy. If you're not joyful yourself, you're never going to inspire anyone else to be joyful. But I spoke to Mikel Arteta, who's my friend. I worked with him at Everton years ago.
When he was a player there?
Yeah, for many years. He was a player, but he was bossy then. He was like a manager already. He was very, very detailed. But I spoke to him recently, and we were speaking about whether it's possible to experience joy and be a Premier League manager, and he thinks not.
Not right.
And that disappoints me a lot, because I don't think that is true. Obviously, there's a lot of pressure and a lot of stress, But ultimately, surely the goal has got to be to live a joyful life, whatever you're doing. And that's obviously his calling because he's so good at it. But just to shut that off and say that you can't be joyful and be a manager, I don't like it. Because there's one guy that I know well, and his name's Sadhguru. And he's like one of the busiest guys you can imagine. He's flying here, there, and everywhere. Different countries on his helicopter. He came to Everton twice and spoke to the team, and he's the most joyful man I've met. So that makes you question, like being a football manager is nowhere near as pressured as Sadhguru's schedule, and he can be joyful, so surely it's possible. And Mikel knows Sadhguru as well because he was there at the first time he came in and spoke to the team.
So I listened to your pod with Sadhguru and Dan, and this will take us down this path.
I hope I'm not as challenging as he is to interview.
No, I thought, and I've heard him on Joe Rogan and all the other big podcasts.
Yeah,
stuff. I thought his use of humour, pretty much in terms of your interactions with him, he's always responding with either like a funny story or an example of something, or challenging you with a question like, "Why don't you think it this way?" But it seems like it's always rooted in humour.
Yes, always.
So, and that, I guess, is linked to joy. They're connected immediately. And I think also about football then, okay, well, as a grassroots coach, we really shouldn't lose sight of that, right? I mean, if we can't have fun doing this, being with our kids, and enjoying this brilliant game, I mean, what are we doing?
Yeah, and if you as a coach aren't having fun doing it, then your kids aren't going to have fun doing it.
Yeah. That's important. That's very important. And I like my fellow colleagues on the weekends. There's been numerous occasions where I feel pressure. We're one down. How are we going to come back? And like, what am I doing?
How old are you? How old are your
under
team?
12. Under 12, and my daughter's team, they're under 10. And like I feel pressure from the parents. I feel pressure from the kids. I feel pressure from my kid. God, come on, am I playing him in the wrong position? And then I think to myself, God, take a step back and enjoy it. And I do try and have that approach.
So imagine how Mikel feels if you feel pressure at that. So obviously at that level, there's a lot more pressure. But even so, I still think you can be joyful. But going back to Sadhguru, when the first time he came to speak to the team, it was the night before we played Liverpool.
This is Everton.
Yes.
Yep.
So he came in. So thinking about working on yourself and the impact that has on other people. So I won't go into the whole story, but the day that he came in, he'd done a talk the night before, and it was a 2-hour public talk, and it was very, very deep. It was on the second time I'd ever met him. And I knew that the next night he was coming to speak to the team, but in the morning he was coming to spend the day at the training ground. And I thought, oh my God, if this guy is anything like he was last night with the team, I'm in deep shit, because the manager will go mad and the players will go mad. The players will hate me.
Who was the manager? David Moyes?
Moyes, yeah. And Moyes had kind of, because he trusted me, he kind of let me get on with it, but kind of distanced himself. So it was all on me. So he's coming in the morning to the training ground, and I'm thinking, how can I get out of this? I do not want him to come here. Like, I can't get out of the talk at night. That's fine. But let me get out of this. I couldn't anyway. But I never feel anxious. But that morning I felt anxious. And so it was a good experience. But the very interesting thing is, he came, and the second that he was there, the second that I was in his presence, the anxiety disappeared in a second, and I felt completely calm and blissful. So to go from there to there in a moment, just by being in someone's energy, has a huge impact. And then when he spoke to the team, he had the same impact on the whole team. Like, you've never seen a group of footballers look like a group of puppy dogs, like they did that night. And one thing he said to them was, you're playing Liverpool tomorrow, so I want you, when you're in the tunnel, I want you to give them a bunch of flowers wrapped in barbed wire. And they're like, what? What do you mean? And he said, right, so you know the goalkeeper, don't you? I forget his name. Was his name Reyes? Spanish goalkeeper. Raya. Yeah. So Reyes. I can't remember.
I remember
anyway,
the ball guy.
Yeah. So he said, you know the goalkeeper. So when you're in the tunnel, just say to him, how are you doing? How's your daughter? How's your wife? And make him think that you're his friend. give him the bunch of flowers wrapped in barbed wire. And then when you go out there, he's going to feel relaxed and calm. And within, I think it was about 10, 15 minutes, we're 2-0 up. And we beat them 2-0. And we'd not beaten Liverpool for 10 years because Everton have got an inferiority complex. And then after the game in the dressing room, they're all singing Sadhguru.
What is it about not just him, Dan, but certain people, particularly in the football hierarchy, where there's an authority and there's something different about a person?
Yeah, it's energy, isn't it? So we're not the physical body, we're not the mind, we are energetic beings, and we pick up on other people's energies. When you talk about football, the other example from my life who's got that charisma is Carlo Ancelotti. So he first came into Everton to meet the team and the staff. It was after, I think we played Arsenal at home, and he comes in the dressing room after. I was just looking in the dressing room and looking at all these players, and they're just like this, and you could hear a pin drop and you could just feel this aura, this energy. Part of it is because of what he'd done in the past. So you project things onto people. And Sadhguru, for example, he speaks in front of 100,000 people. So he's taking in all of this projection. And that builds up your own energy and aura. And then part of it is, yeah, they're just unique. And they're wired differently, like Cole and Rooney. And
I wonder, because I think you've got it too, Dan. Like when we were, when we were in Germany recently, and you kindly spoke at our conference for 40 years. Coerver's 40 years old, and we had this conference at Adidas headquarters in Germany, and you could hear a pin drop when you were speaking too. And our colleagues, you know, they were aware of your dad, and some of them are friends with your dad. But you know, that was the first time you were in front of them, and it made me think, God, how does someone have that impression instantly? And I guess it's a number of things. It's how you present yourself, it's the non-verbal stuff.
I think in my own case it was more the tennis ball, wasn't it?
Yeah,
because I threatened to, if people weren't aware, then I'd throw a tennis ball at them.
Well, you've captured their concentration immediately then.
Yes, but it's more about energy. So if you're speaking in front of a group and you're connected to your mind and body and your energy, and then you through that connect to the group and have the intention to connect with them, then it changes the dynamic. And Sadhguru's the master. He's a master, honestly. My wife, she's not as weird as me, but we went to his ashram in India and with the kids, and the kids were young. So the first night we went there and he talked for 2 hours. It was too long for the kids. So the second night Ruth said to me, "Why don't you go?" And I was like, "No, you go." She's like, okay. So she goes. 2 hours later, I'm lying in bed. She comes in and she's like, "Oh, you're going to be happy." I'm like, what? And she said, she was sat there in the audience and he walked out and he kind of caught her eye and she burst into tears and she cried for an hour nonstop and she had no idea why. So his energy is on a different level and it impacts people. And if you see audiences that he speaks to, people are doing mad things because his energy impacts them in a mad way because it's so powerful. And
we can't explain that, or there's no science to explain it. It's something
it's beyond science, isn't it? Because science is limited. Science is fairly limited to physical reality. So there's things beyond that. So he said when he was 30, he had an experience. He was meditating on this hill in India. It's called Chamundi Hill. And he was sat there and he went into this deep state. And when he came out of it, he was blissful and there was tears all down him. And he felt like he'd been there a couple of hours. I think the first time was 6 days, not moved. And people were around him, following him. In India, you don't have to do much for people to follow you. So, but then it just grew from there. But that experience changed who he was fundamentally, and that impacted his whole energy. And yeah, because he was like, he just lived in a village in India, was a normal guy, and now he's got millions and millions of volunteers worldwide. So there's something magical about that.
Well, I think, Dan, you've got the sort of scientific background, and then you've got, your interests in these other things, including some of his teachings, I guess, and then the Indian influence as well, and particularly with yoga. I know you're amazing at yoga and a real, what do you call it? You're very enthusiastic about yoga.
Yeah.
How did that work for you from a football perspective because I think you introduced it to Everton's first team, right, Dan? And then obviously there's going to be some barriers initially, I assume, and then get one person into it, and then is that how it worked for you? And
I was always, I'm not a type of person that's going to push things on anyone. So I think it's really important that people come to it at their own speed when they're ready. So one funny story, my first week at Everton, at that point, I wasn't really teaching it so much. I was just kind of on my own journey. I think I'd not been to India yet. I went to India the first time after a couple of years at Everton, and then went back again and again. But the first week, I would just do my own practice in the gym in the afternoons, and then some of the players would see it and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, that's interesting." Friday morning, the first week, my boss, who's the head physio at tennis, says, "Oh, come here, come in my office." I had to go in the office. He was like, "Duncan Ferguson, who's the centre forward, he's come in this morning with a bad neck and he's blamed you." I was like, "What?" He said, he was watching what you were doing in the gym, he was doing it at home, and he hurt his neck, and he says it's your fault. So I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to get sacked my first week at work. And then luckily, Walter Smith, who was the manager, he died a couple of years ago. He's an amazing man. And he came into the office, he said, "Look, don't worry. It's not your fault. Dunk's a bit mad." But then me and Dunk became great friends, and we still are great friends. But in terms of my own journey about teaching players yoga and stuff, one of the big things that happened was Phil Neville came from United, and the first thing he asked was, "Who's the yoga teacher?" And we didn't really have one. So I was like, "Yeah, I'll do it." So we became very close. And because Phil was like a cultural architect.
What does that mean, Dan?
It means that he came in and he impacted the culture big time through his habits. Again, because he came from United, people automatically respect him. But the way he did things, he changed the culture in a big way, like mentally, physically, every way. Players looked up to him and followed him, and he changed the culture. So because he was a cultural architect, people would follow him. And my group of yogis, let's say, there was a group of about 10 of them that used to come 3 times a week, and it just grew. And there's players like Gareth Barry, Phil, Stephen Naismith, loads of them were really regular. Sylvain Distin, Tim Howard, Tim Cahill, Mikel sometimes. And for me, the big thing for me about teaching those players yoga was to make them more present and more aware of their body. It wasn't about doing the fancy moves. And at the end of every session, I'd make them lie down and not move for 5 minutes and close their eyes. And I would talk them through a deep relaxation. And that was my main purpose, to help them relax, because most of them don't know how to relax. And just giving them that taste of relaxation, I felt was the most important thing.
When I finished my very bad amateur career, Dan, I got into yoga in a serious way. And at the beginning of doing all the practices, I found that bit the hardest, and I couldn't sit still.
Yeah.
And fast forward, when I started to get into it, that was the best bit. That's the bit you look forward to. And you found a real deep sense of stillness and relaxation at that point.
Well, Phil, he used to find it hard. And I'd say, right, close your eyes, lie down and stay completely still. And then at the end of 5 minutes, I say, right, you can go, and he'd jump up and he'd be off.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of people fall asleep at that stage. It's deep, meaningful sleep. You mentioned Phil Neville, so listen to all your podcasts in preparation for our conversation today, Dan. And we talked about this a little bit in the coffee before the show. Firstly, the thing, your rapport and your friendship was so clear, and he came across so well, and so well-meaning too. I thought, like so positive, because I remember, at a certain stage of his career, obviously he came under a lot of criticism, particularly at that last couple of years at United, and how he sort of reinvented himself from an outsider's perspective at Everton, and then to see what he's done in his managerial career. And you begin from your conversations to kind of understand how he did it with a really positive, sort of pragmatic, open approach.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about stuff we could learn from how he's done that?
Yeah, well, I think there's so much you can learn from Phil. He's an amazing guy, but his mantra is attack the day. So after he'd do that relaxation, he'd be up and he'd be attacking the day.
Yeah.
But he learnt that from a young age, like through his parents. His dad used to drive buses, lorries,
right?
And he'd be away, then he'd come back and he'd make sure that all of the kids, that was their mentality. It came from the family, his mum as well. But both the boys were international footballers, and his sister's an international netball player, and their coaches or TV personalities, whatever. So for Phil especially, he was, I think, 2 years younger than the class of 92.
Okay.
And because he was Gary's younger brother, he was seen a little bit as the baby of the group. So I think it was harder for him at United to kind of step into that like leadership role because of the way he was seen. And also when Phil was 18, he was recognized as the best talent of all of them. But then he got glandular fever and he was out for a year,
right.
And that affected his growth. But when he came to Everton, he was able to really step into that leadership role, and people looked up to him, and he impacted the culture in a big way. But his work ethic, his attention to detail, his single-mindedness to want to get better and improve. Like now he's a coach, and as I said, I speak to him a lot now. And he's looking at every detail and just wants to improve himself and get better. And obviously he loves football, but he loves coaching, and he loves like leading a group of players and inspiring a group of players, because it's not easy being a coach, as we've spoken about. But he just wants to push himself, and he's a great role model.
That openness, Stan, seems to be a hallmark of all the best people I've been lucky enough to meet in football. Would you say that's a common trait? In you mentioned Ancelotti and Mikel Arteta and all these amazing people.
Yeah,
they're not closed people, right? They're open to learning. And
big time open to learning. You have to be open to learning. David Moyes is another one. Everton, we didn't have the top players, but the whole philosophy was to improve players however we could. Yeah. And that obviously aligned with me and resonated with me. So every year at the end of the year, however well we've done, it's like, what can we do better? What can we do better to inspire people to get better and do better? And to be like that, you have to be open.
And that requires a humility, doesn't it? I mean,
for sure.
Ancelotti's won every single thing you can win.
Yeah.
And to be open to new ideas and learning requires an amazing amount of humility.
Yeah.
And I think to maybe like grassroots football and people that are, I don't need to, why would I need to understand that new thing or new idea or new tactic or whatever it is?
Yeah.
I'm thinking, wow, look at these greatest people in the game.
Do you know the other thing, and I think it's tied into what you're saying about being open, the other hallmark quality of all of these great people is curiosity. Mm-hmm. So not only curious about how to get better and about football, but curious about everything. You know, Alex Ferguson, he wants to meet everyone who's good in their field and find out how they got good in their field. And he wants to know like how that can inspire him to inspire the players. If you ever listen to any of his team talks or anything like that, it's all about like how our ancestors helped us get where we are now and how we can inspire other people to go wherever they need to go to. Phil used to talk about him. He was funny. Phil said he was an absolute master of... So night before a game, he'd come into your hotel room and he'd speak to you for 10, 15 minutes and he'd leave and you'd feel $1 million. You'd think you're the best player on the planet. And then about 10 minutes later, you'd realise he just dropped you. And he said he was so good at that, making you feel like you're amazing when he's dropping you. And that's a rare skill. And that is one of the most difficult things for coaches to do. And each coach that I've worked with has approached that in a different way. You know, how you let players know that they're not in the team. Some coaches don't say anything. Some coaches lie. Some coaches say a minimum, and then some coaches are completely honest and open. And ultimately, that's what people and players want and respect. but it's hard because, you know, you're playing every 3 days at the top level, and you want to try and keep the whole squad on board. And it's hard to do that with integrity and honesty. And it's not an easy job, that's for sure.
I think that's super interesting. And I think the parallel I would draw for a grassroots setting is also that constant dialogue and communication you need with parents and players.
Yeah.
Because 1 week you're doing well, 1 week you're not, 1 week you've had to change your team, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But I think that consistent, here's where we're going and here's why we're trying to do what we're doing is, from my limited experience of grassroots football, the best approach.
Yes.
And to have the more difficult conversations up front and say, no, that's a setback, but we're still going on course and this is where we want to go. And so it made me think of when you said that in the professional setting.
Yeah.
Us grassroots guys, how we probably, because we've got a couple of options in that scenario as well. You could lie, you could not say anything, you know, all the things that you detail.
Yeah.
But that constant open dialogue with parents
exactly.
and the players is important.
Yeah. And that it's the same thing in any industry, in any organization. You know, the business people I work with, it's exactly the same. Like, communication is the most important thing, but communicating with empathy, but also candor, you know, radical candor. It's what people really want. And as a parent, you know, my kids taught me more than anyone, I think, how to do that and how to create boundaries and how kids love boundaries.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's about like leaning into those difficult conversations and having them as much as possible. And that really creates the kind of culture that you want in any organization or industry. And it's the same in football.
So you talked about, we talked about loads, Dan. So we talked about Everton, talked about some advice for parents, for players. We talked about some advice for parents. As you've gone in then to Villa next, right, Dan, in terms of your experience there, is there anything that you took from that experience that you think could have a relevance or from an advice perspective, pass on to sort of grassroots coaches and players and stuff? Did you learn? You must have learned loads, obviously, from that experience. Is there something that you took away from that might be relevant to sort of grassroots audience?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind, I'm not sure how relevant it is to grassroots coaches, but it's about how aligned the organisation is. So a lot of clubs now have ownership, then sporting director, then head coach, and that has to be really aligned. And I spoke at FIFA a few weeks ago, and Arsene Wenger was there, and he spoke and he said that the most important thing for a manager, if you've got a sporting director, is that the sporting director chooses the manager. And a lot of Aston Villa, that happened, and they were really aligned, and that allowed the rest of the club to be aligned. Right. Although the ownership at the time, I think he's in jail now, the owner. So that had an impact. You know, even the ownership has an impact in the whole organisation. But because they were aligned and the sporting director chose the manager, it created a good culture at Aston Villa. So in terms of grassroots, I don't know how that would apply. But again, it's about alignment and communication and clear roles and responsibilities.
I think it's probably also a bit about right people, right bums on seats, or whatever that expression is, Dan. You know, like, I think back to we're lucky in Coerver, we work with a lot of good people, but we're only as good as the good people that we work with. Yeah. So the recruitment of good people and the decision of who that right person is relevant in the Aston Villa sort of example, but also at the grassroots level. Yeah, and also like how you are at Coerver as an organisation and how you communicate with each other will impact who you recruit. Right. Because the culture that you have will recruit a certain type of person. So if you've not got a good culture, then you better look at that. Yeah. And it comes back to what we said at the start about if you're shouting at your kid, you need to start looking at yourself first. So what's your culture like? I think our culture, I think you got a good glimpse of it, Dan, in Germany. I think it's high performing in terms of, if you think about our competition. So that's everyone from sort of national federations to professional clubs to, you know, individual coaching organisations. We're in a very difficult, competitive landscape in terms of our business model, which is how do we recruit players for our academies and camps, and how do we get coaches into our coach education courses. So if we weren't high performing, and I think if we weren't authentic, we'd struggle. And at the root of everything, I think that my dad and Charlie and Will Coerver have an idea, a 40-year-old idea that is as relevant today as it was 40 years ago. Yeah. And it was kind of like, talk about seeing stuff in the future. I mean, to have that idea 40 years ago and for it to be absolutely relevant today, looking at all the best sides and how they play and the players that they're looking to recruit, it is unbelievable. So at the root of what we do, Dan, is good.
Yes.
And now we've just got to build on top of that with acquiring good partners to work with, basically.
Speaking of Charlie,
so
you know that when I was about 17, I went and coached at Lake Placid.
So this is Charlie Cook, who's the co-founder of Coerver Coaching.
Yes. Yeah. So I went to Lake Placid, coached there for a week, and then I stayed at Charlie's house for a week in Cincinnati, and then I went to coach in Atlanta for a week. And I actually shared his hotel room. So there was 2 beds, and he used to sit there after we'd coached, smoking this big cigar. And I had to sleep in this room. And I saw him at the event a few weeks ago, and he didn't remember me. We stayed in the same room for a whole week, and I stayed at his house for a week. He did not remember me.
It doesn't surprise me, to be honest. I think that's the other thing I'd say. I don't know if this is a cultural point, but I think the relationships and the humour and the good people and the shared experience is also something that bonds us together. I mean, we did a little informal poll, and we worked out that there was 1,200 years of combined Coerver experience at that conference, and that accumulative, or I don't know what the right word is, that common experience is strong.
Yeah. Well, I feel like, it's clearly from my time there, it's clearly a very strong community. And we're in a time now where we're lacking in communities, and people are craving connection from communities. So it's a great thing that you've got such a strong community, and you're doing it through a thing, football, which in itself creates team, connection, community. But the thing about football at the top level is that now that sense of connection isn't as strong as it used to be.
Sure.
Because players now, for whatever reason, are a little bit more individualistic, and they've got their own teams at home, which gives them that sense of community, but they've lost the community of the team. Like, if you think about my dad, he's still best friends with his whole team at Man City in the 1970s.
Wow, amazing.
Like, lifelong friends.
Yeah.
Whereas now, for many reasons, like different cultures, staying at teams less time, social media, all those things, it's changed the culture. So that connectivity isn't the same. But as a coach, as a Coerver coach, it's a huge opportunity to create that community and to help teach young people how to connect with other people and work as a group and a team, because that will set them up for life. Because whatever you do in life, you can't do it alone, and you have to do it collaboratively.
Yeah, I think communities are, I've written it down, Dan. That's exactly what we're lucky to have, a good community.
Yeah.
That's been 40 years in the making, and I think that's amazing and unique too.
Yeah.
Right, let's get to present day, Dan. So you're a performance coach. You have a lot of high-profile clients, particularly in the Premier League, but also in other sports, etc. Is there one reason, is there a commonality of why they come to you to help them? Or is each reason kind of individual?
Yeah. It's kind of individual with obviously common themes.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking walking here, I think if I had a team of my players, I think we'd do quite well in the Premier League.
Right.
I don't think we'd beat City, maybe not Arsenal, but I think we'd do well.
Top 6?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
100%. I'm very confident of that. But like a lot of the themes are confidence, strikers not scoring goals, kind of the other thing about what I spoke about in terms of the balance of pleasure and pain. You know, you get to a point in your career where you've earned more money than you'll ever want or need, and the pressure gets higher and higher, and you're at that stage of where the joy goes. So how can you find that joy even when you've got all of the like physical desires that you wanted. And ultimately, it's about helping all of them tap into the joy of what they experienced when they're a kid.
Right.
Like there's one top player that I work with that I'm thinking about right now, and that's mainly the majority of our work, because he loves football, and he loved football as a kid and always has loved football, but it kind of gets lost. Like your attitude kind of just goes down slightly, and before you know it, you're lost. So it's how to get back to that step by step, and he's there.
And how would you work with a player like that, Dan? What sort of stuff would you be doing? And
Well, it's about many things. Let me just think about him. So I've worked with him for about a year. And when we first met, for the first few sessions, it was mainly to provide him a space to offload all the things that he was holding inside. Because a lot of players, like a lot of men, have got I hate saying men, because I don't like this whole men thing and like men's clubs and stuff like that, because women are in the same situation. I work with women who are business leaders, and there's no spaces for them to express how they really feel. So initially it was about creating that space where he could feel like he could tell me everything that was on his mind and all of the emotions, and some emotion came out. And then when you get through that phase, it's about connecting back with the feelings, the emotion, because your physical body knows what it feels like to feel joy. It's the physical body that feels it. So getting him in touch with those memories of when he used to feel that, and bringing it into his body again and again and again, and using different methods to bring that into his body, into the present moment, and then it becomes a habit. And before you know it, you're starting to feel more joyful, more happy. And then also to reframe some of the things that you're not happy with. Like, players can always blame the manager. Players can always blame their teammates. Players can blame the sporting director. But it disempowers you. So if you're really unhappy at the club, okay, fine, leave. But if you can't leave, then you need to work out the best way of working with your energies and your physicality to start to enjoy it, and then play with freedom.
And is one of the benefits, Dan, of working with you, that as a person that's independent of a club, is that you have their complete confidence.
Yeah.
There's not the connection. They don't have to worry about that getting back to the manager. Or they can be honest, I guess.
Yeah, it is difficult. Like in football, it's difficult. They've tried many different models of bringing psychologists in and stuff like that. And it's difficult because whoever brings the person in, if they're employed by the club, then obviously they've got a code of conduct and they can't speak about it. But there's an unconscious pressure to, like, who are they working for? Is it the player or the club or the manager? So you have to be very clear with your boundaries. And quite often there's a paranoia in clubs where someone comes in and you don't trust them. And yeah, even if you're in a club, you're part of that dynamic. So you've not got that vision to see what it actually feels like from the outside, because you're entangled yourself. So yeah, I actually really love being more on the outside to give it more of a view like that.
And in terms of sort of the amount of clients you can work with in that way, is there like a finite amount, or because that must be very mentally intense.
Yeah, I'm there.
You're there. You don't need any more clients.
Yeah. So now my next thing is, how can I scale and like help other people tap into these things that the top players work on, without it being time intensive for me. And I'm working on that in different ways.
So Dan, looking at the game at the moment, when you think about the physical preparation, the technical excellence, where they're at, it's hard for us to see, for me, from an outside perspective, how the game can improve that much. It seems like the standard is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Is the area of improvement from a mental perspective, is that where we'll all begin to see the most amount of gains?
Yeah, 100%.
Right.
But I do agree that the standard is so high, it's going to be very, very marginal gains from now on.
Right.
Because physically they're top, technically they're all top.
Yeah.
But I do think there is huge scope for mental, but also attention. And It's kind of mental, but like where you put your attention and how much in the moment you can be. One of the players who I worked with at Everton in the early days, I was teaching him yoga, and he was like, "Why are we doing this?" So he was in some posture, and I said, "I'm helping you be more present in your body, because normally your mind's elsewhere. You're thinking about something else, the past or the future." And I said, "Right, I want you to notice when you're present and when you're not present." And this was on a Friday. So we had a game at home on the Saturday at Goodison. He was a midfielder. So on the Monday, he comes in and he was like, "You're not going to believe this. I was dribbling on the ball in the centre of the field at Goodison. And as I was running with the ball, I was thinking about what I was going to have at McDonald's after the game." But normally he wouldn't have even noticed that. He wouldn't have been aware of it. So it's making him more aware of that. And then you've got the choice. Do you keep thinking about that, or do you put your attention on the ball where it needs to be in the moment? And Djokovic speaks about this. He says that, which is what I'm saying basically, that, you know, it's not about being present the whole of the time, but it's about how quickly you can bring your mind back, bring it back. And he says, even though he looks calm all of the time, sometimes there's a volcano going on inside of him. But as soon as he recognizes it, how quickly can he come back? How quickly can he be present? And that's the ultimate work, how you can train your mind to be in the present and your attention.
And that's something we can all improve.
100%, yeah. And it's about intention and just being more embodied in the body. And you can improve it, but you have to have intention and practice it. So meditation, it's about going and sitting, and there's many ways of doing it, but it's all about focus. It's about training the mind to focus on something, whether it's a mantra or the breath or your body. But meditation for me is only really useful if you take that into your life and you become more present in your life. So you have to teach people how to do both. And there was a player who I worked with at the under-21s Euros last year. And this is great advice for young coaches and also young players who they work with. So it was the final of the Euros under-21s. We're playing Spain. And after the game, he said to me, "You'll be pleased because the work that we're doing, it really helped." I was like, "Right, tell me what happened." So the first action, he gets the ball, runs down the wing, cuts in, shoots, hits the post. Great action. He said in the past, he would have kind of got carried away with himself and thought, "Oh, yeah, I've done really well here. I'm a great player," and lost the moment. But because we've been practicing, he could let go of that quickly and come back. Second action, because he was there, same thing. Runs down, cuts in, crosses, should have scored. Great action. Again, he lets go of it, comes back in the present. Third action, he's on the ball in the middle of the pitch, falls over the ball, Spain get the ball, attack, and should have won. So normally a negative occurrence like that has a bigger impact on the brain and it's harder to let go of.
Yeah.
But because he's let go of the two positives, he could let go of that quickly. And he did very well in the game and very well in the tournament and is now doing very well in the Premier League. And he does all of the other training, obviously, physical, everything, but he trains his mind daily and he meditates daily, but he also visualizes daily and he practices in training daily, bringing his mind back and back and back to the moment. So that practical application is so important.
So Dan, with the grassroots player, and I'm thinking of a particular player in our little U12 team,
Yeah.
the negative stuff is very hard for him to let go of.
Yes.
And I think this is something that you see maybe with sort of slightly more talented players at the amateur level, where the success, they lose the ball and get disappointed and, you know, shoulders go down or whatever, the head goes down and they find it very difficult to recover. How, as a grassroots coach, what would your advice be to me to help him with that situation? Because he lets one thing kind of spoil it for him a bit.
So education's important. So you explain to him why that happens. And there's a natural, what's the word? The brain naturally, with a negative thing like that, is more responsive. And it goes back to our caveman days where we had to look out for danger so we had to look out for pain more than pleasure.
Right.
So because if we didn't, we might get eaten alive by a lion. So that part of the old part of the brain is still active. So you explain to the kid that is the old part of your brain. And to counteract that part, you need to consciously think about the positive things more. And also know that is the old part of your brain coming in. So even understanding that can help people and players come out of it more. And then you start teaching him, like the top players now, like Mo Salah, Anthony Gordon, Marcus Rashford, all of these players are practicing letting go of the mistakes as quickly as you can. And you set up games and practices where it encourages them to do that.
Right.
You know, we were speaking about the game earlier that I beat all of the top players at, basically 2-touch head tennis.
Yeah.
And one of the things about that is it's so quick. And because I've meditated for so long, I'm really good at staying present. And I used to use that as my practice to stay present. Whereas the player, like they lose a few points and then they've gone because they get into that downward spiral. So creating things like that allow the player to deliberately let go and come back into the moment again and again and again is a really good thing. But you have to educate them and let them know that's why you're doing it. But the other thing about the Coerver stuff is, you know, my dad taught me at a young age, and it forces you to be present. It's a great thing because you can't feel the ball and do those skills with the end of your foot without really being there and being present. And then the problem with the mind is when you get really good at it, it becomes automatic. So you can do it without being present. And then you get lazy and you start thinking about McDonald's and stuff like that. So the training is to keep present, stay present again and again and again.
I think the good news, Dan, going back on it, is that we can all improve on that. And it's something, if we're conscious of it, it's something that we can all improve on.
Yes. And as a coach, like when you're aware that the pressure's getting to you, so that pressure impacts you in a physical way. There's some feeling in your body that lets you know there's pressure here. So the more in tune with that you can be, the more that it will pass through your system. Because normally what happens is you feel, I'm under pressure. Then you go into your head and you spend a lot of time in your head. And at that time, the pressure's building and building in your body. But you're here, you don't notice. And when you're here, there's no way that emotion, that feeling can pass through your body. So being more aware as a coach really helps your players because you're working through your stuff. And then you're not going to project that pressure because it's worked through you and it's moved through you. And as a parent.
Last thing, Dan, with your performance coach hat on, how England have improved at penalties. And I know this was the subject of a lot of sort of media coverage, particularly with the last tournament.
Yeah.
Can you summarise how we've improved in penalty taking?
Yeah, I don't know all the research, but I know that England were amazing and they brought in 2 guys or 1 guy who'd done a lot of research about penalty taking. And I know that one of the big thing was that they buddied up, didn't they?
Right.
So when one penalty taker, they buddied them with another player. And again, it comes back to connection and the feeling that you're connected to something greater than yourself. And England were amazing at it. That was one of the things. But then there's all the other science about where the goalkeeper stands when you're walking up. You'll notice that a lot of goalkeepers, Jordan Pickford did it, he'd try and stand as close as he could to the ball because then the image of the goalkeeper is bigger than when they're standing on the line.
Yeah.
So all fine details like that, they got really well, really good.
And the mental part of it, though, in particular, you think the buddy up thing was the most important thing that you're aware of,
yes,
Dan? Like
the buddy up, but also the breath. So they were taught to do particular breathing as they went up to take the penalty. And that got them in a state ready to execute well. Right. It got their nervous system in a parasympathetic state and not a sympathetic state, which is a heightened tension reaction. And like that level of player, when they're in parasympathetic, they can execute 99 times out of 100. They can put it in wherever they want to put it. Yeah. So it's all about being in that state. And the breath is the link between the mind and the body. So if you're breathing in a certain pattern, you'll feel a certain way. So it's the easy tool that you can use to get your parasympathetic state active.
And am I right in saying, Dan, that's the state of flow? So that's when anyone would have experienced this in their lifetime, when you think, wow, this is going very well and seems quite effortless.
Yes. And so basically the sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight.
Right.
So when you go into a situation where you have to fight or freeze, and you tighten up and you feel anxious and you prepare the body to fight, and the parasympathetic is the opposite, and it's about being fully relaxed and in the moment. And the very best players are the ones who play and execute and do all of these marvelous things that they do in a completely relaxed way. Go back to Cole Palmer. The way he sits on the couch is the way he plays football. Yeah. And that's why he's so good. Because for him, it's like playing in his garden with his friends. So the players that can stay in that state are the very best players. So as a coach, and creating that environment and encouraging that environment is the most important thing.
Last question, Danny. So you've had an incredible career, varied career, working at the top flight football, U21, Euro Championships, Everton, Villa, now working with some of the world's best footballers in an individual capacity. You must have learnt a lot yourself. Is there a couple of gems you could give us, some shortcuts or things that you think, wow, I wish I learnt that from him or her or that experience or that club, where you think, wow, that was really helpful?
The bad news is there's no shortcuts. That's the bad news.
That's the bad news.
Everyone's looking for shortcuts these days. However, I would say that probably the best shortcut is to change your state. So if you feel anxious, if you feel a state that you don't want to feel, do something to change it and break that pattern quickly. Do anything to break the pattern. And you can do that so easily now. There's so many ways, but you do it by using the breath, using visualization, using the body, moving the body, just to change the state, break that state. But I'm so lucky because I get to work with some amazing people and I learn more from them than they learn from me. I just thought of another one. So one of these top players, he spoke to me about what he's looking for when he goes onto the pitch. And in the first 10 minutes of the game, what he really pays attention to is space. And he's working out like their defense, like Liverpool has a certain pattern to their defense, and he's working out where the players are going and where the space is going to be. And then he's refining what he does, his actions, to find that space. It's all about space. Whereas a lot of less, like lower quality players, they're thinking about where the player is. It's all about space. And that is actually another thing that Sadhguru said when he spoke to the team. You pay attention to the space. It's all about where the space is and not where the players are. And just hearing that from a top player, it makes you see the game in a different way, and it makes you understand how he looks at the game and how he's such a great player.
Busquets is one of my favourite players of all time, Dan. And to think about how he mastered that whole space thing, because it doesn't look like he's really running the whole game.
Yeah.
But he I don't know how you make something so complex and so difficult look so easy.
Yeah.
But he has done that for 20 years or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Do you think he's the best example of someone that's mastered space on the football pitch?
Yeah. The other one that comes to mind is Pirlo. But even, I think any top player is good at it, especially midfield and attacking players.
Yeah.
You have to be. Especially midfield, it's so congested. To have that awareness around you the whole time, it's a super skill. And it's a type of intelligence that people think intelligence is going to school and learning things. There's many different forms of intelligence, and this spatial awareness is a really incredible type of intelligence that can be trained and mastered. It's another thing that you can help your kids and your coaches help players with. And it's so transferable to other parts of life as well. That's the great thing about football.
One of the things that gets me every weekend, Dan, is our players asking for the ball when they're standing right next to an opponent. It happens no matter. I've tried it in every way I can think of to explain to them, this is not when you ask for the ball. If you're Xavi or Iniesta or one of those guys, they can take the ball there.
Yeah.
You can't. Get into space, then ask for the ball. More space, more time. You touch. Don't have to worry about your touch. And kids, I don't know. I still haven't figured out how to communicate that effectively to our players?
It's a complex thing, isn't it, being in a team? Like, it's a group of players who've got their own desires and their own desires that want to be fulfilled, and then they've got their parents' desires for them as well.
Right.
So all that comes into it. But they have to realise that no human being is as fast as a football. So it's about working out where the space is on the pitch, and ultimately every player wants to win, don't they? So you have to tap into their collective and individual desire to want to win.
Yeah.
And also the pain of losing. It's both of those.
Yeah. So how do you? Last Sunday we lost 4-0. Grassroots coach, team.
You're going to get
players.
sacked.
My position's up for review. How do we all, parents, players, coaches, respond from a 4-0 defeat?
There's many ways, but I guess what underpins it is, like, what is your culture about? Is your culture about winning?
No.
Or is your culture about developing as a group and as an individual? So in that game that they lost 4-0, they probably learnt more about themselves and about a group than they did when they win 4-0. So you have to highlight those lessons that they learnt and how they can bring that into the game this week. But you have to reiterate the underpinning values and mission of your club, which is to develop people and individuals, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And if you reiterate that, then it gets stronger in them. So, as a manager, you can say to your team, I want to play open, expansive football. But as soon as a player loses it, you tell them off. So your actions are more important than what you say. So if your actions reiterate that this is about development, so I'm happy that we lost 4-0 because you're going to develop by learning this and this and this.
Yes.
You're embedding that culture.
Brilliant. I think the biggest thing, we played good football and we did what we asked mostly, but the competition part, the desire, the fire inside to compete probably wasn't there. And I think that's the lesson maybe we can learn. You've got to be intense about things.
So that's your job as a manager, to give them that. So you should be sacked.
Yeah. No, fair enough.
Nah, but obviously, like, that comes and goes. And actually, there's a Premier League player I was talking to last week, and he said to me he'd played 3 games that week. 1 was in Europe, 2 were in the Premier League. And the third one in the Premier League, he just felt a little bit flat. And it's natural.
Yeah.
It's natural, but you're expected to be at these levels every time.
Yeah.
So the question was, what can he do when he feels flat like that? And it's not easy. But the two, we spoke together about it. The 2 ideas are that he runs around like a madman and gets that energy in his system going. And the other one that is he goes and does a tackle that gets his fire going. But sometimes when it's the 3rd game in a week, it's hard to do. And you just kind of have to accept it. And that's the manager's job, to rotate the squad at the right time to make sure that happens less.
Brilliant. Dan, that's it. I promise. Thank you very much for your time. It's been great speaking to you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Cheers, Dan. Hi, guys. Quick reminder that if you liked our podcast, you have the power to help us. You can help by simply liking the podcast, leaving a comment with your thoughts, sharing it with your friends, and of course, by subscribing.